Production by
Michael Lofton.
We often hear, especially in Orthodox apologetics, that the Catholic paradigm never really unites us to God because of some misunderstood version of created grace. I'm not trying to get into the created grace controversy right now, but I'm using that as a context to ask this. How does the essence and energies distinction in the Eastern tradition fare better in uniting us to God when the individual, at least coming from some Eastern Orthodox, indicate that we only commune with the energies and never with the essence? Could you maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually have a whole article that's forthcoming on this stuff, and you can't omit grace from the discussion. So
Yeah.
I think your instincts are right.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep grace talk to a minimum because we really want to try to concentrate on what's going on inside of God.
Mm-hmm.
But basically our problem then is this. Early medieval Christianity, so let's say the 1250s, I'm going to call that early medieval because we're dealing with scholasticism versus palamism, right? So kind of the early scholastic, the robust scholastic period we're talking about, we've developed now a full engagement with the Aristotelian corpus, the entire body of Aristotle's writings. So we're talking about 1250 or so. You're still seeing in the 1240s and the 1250s this idea that the relationship between the Holy Spirit or charity or God and the human being is the relationship of a mover, that is the spirit, and the moved, and that might be, let's say, the human will. So the spirit comes down and in some way is in contact with me and my will gets moved, right? So the mover to the moved. And then the word that we would use nowadays for that would be synergy. Well, that sounds a lot like orthodoxy. So we actually see Aquinas engaging with this theory, and Aquinas' major problem with this, he doesn't call it heretical. And this is essentially the Orthodox theory. It's already existent in the West. The Orthodox should be perfectly okay with this because, I mean, their whole point is well, this has always been around. It's you Catholics that have rejected this, right? So if it's always been around, they shouldn't have a problem with it, traces of it still existing in the West as late as 1240s and 50s. But Aquinas' major problem with it is that it's so ambiguous, he can't really get a lot out of it. He can't talk in technical, mechanical, Aristotelian terms about how the mover is moving the moved. And I think this is the major disadvantage of the essence energies discussions in the West, is it only gets you so far. Then there's this giant mystery of what kind of movement it is. It's not like the movement, like a mechanical movement. It's moving the will and these sorts of things. And the other problem is that there's the danger of what happens when you have a person that you're in contact with immediately in your will. What does that look like when the Holy Spirit is like shoving your will? Now, the East, as early as 1334, when Palamas is writing his apodictic treatises on the Holy Spirit, has learned from Barlaam about the Latin's position on the essence, energies, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So for Palamas, it's sort of like, well, all the gifts of the Holy Spirit are just realities in God. So God supereminently or infinitely has all the gifts that are listed of the Spirit. Let's say, anything from love to peace, whatever it is. These are gifts which are identified by appropriation with the Spirit, because that's the Spirit is the one that we see as principally acting in our world. And just so we're aware of this, in Palamas's own confession of faith, he's quite clear that the entire Holy Trinity acts ad extra, just like you and I would affirm as a classic Latin position. Where does he get that from? Well, he gets that from John Damascene's De Fide Orthodoxa. Okay, so there is an admission dogmatically in both John Damascene and in Gregory Palamas as a starting point that when we talk about the Holy Spirit acting in this world, not inside the Trinity, but acting in this world, is that we are talking about by appropriation. We're saying that the whole Trinity is always acting. So we're right in the same theology so far. The difference is between the East and the West. Palamas's criticism of the Thomism that he's learning from Barlaam, who's debating Thomists but kind of absorbing some of their stuff in Constantinople in 1334, is he's noticing that Barlaam doesn't see that there's a different notion of the gifts of the Spirit, and that is each perfection of the Spirit is just another energy or activity, an eternal reality in God's essence, which is like goodness or wisdom. So you have these other perfections, and that when we participate in the Holy Spirit, let's say our will participates in love, then the God acting ad extra lets us participate in some sort of deep way with God's love, not directly with the Holy Spirit. So it's not directly the Holy Spirit that we're, let's say, seeing or feeling in our will. I shouldn't say feeling, experiencing in our will. But it is actually his love, which is co-infinite, a perfection which is co-eternal, which is not the Spirit himself, which is a person, but is a reality in the Trinity. So this kind of language for us sounds rather strange because the Franciscan tradition has not dominated theology since before the 19th century. And so for us, this idea that we can somehow talk about the Holy Trinity ad extra being participated only insofar as its love is concerned sounds really weird to a Thomist, but these exact discussions Thomas is trying to change because they were like this in the 1240s. So the culture of the 1240s was that the Holy Spirit was like this. It was a gift that when we say that you love with the Holy Spirit, it really means that in some way you possess the Spirit or the Spirit's co-eternal love. There was a debate going on whether or not Augustine identified the Spirit as love, with meaning that somehow we really do have a love which is to be identified with the co-eternal attribute of love in God. So these kinds of debates existed in Latindom, and we've simply forgotten that they were valid talking points, and they were never declared heretical, but Thomas was quite clearly unsatisfied with them.